There are two kinds of people when it comes to confrontation: those who provoke and those who respond. But the moment you respond, you relinquish control. That's a truth only a rare few ever understand. The ones who grasp it don't just walk through life unbothered. They move like shadows in rooms full of noise. One of them was Machiavelli. He knew that insults weren't just careless words hurled in anger. No, they were probes, deliberate provocations meant to lure you out, to see if they could manipulate your center of gravity. The insult isn't the goal, your reaction is. And once you react, the power transfers. Most people don't get that. They believe speaking up, defending themselves, or even lashing back is a form of strength. They think it restores dignity, but what it really does is confirm to the attacker that they've found a soft spot. And worse, it broadcasts that vulnerability to everyone watching. It tells the room where to push next. Machiavelli understood something much colder. He didn't counterattack. He didn't justify or explain. He simply refused to enter the arena altogether. He didn't fight fire with fire. He took the air out of the room, suffocating the conflict before it even began. The truth is, reacting means stepping into someone else's narrative. It means playing on their stage. The moment you try to defend your pride, you acknowledge that they've threatened it. But what if nothing in you shifts? What if their words find no purchase? That's where the real reversal begins. Machiavelli didn't silence his enemies by overpowering them. He did it by never acknowledging their attempts to pull him down. He redefined the entire game. He turned the insult into a ghost, felt for a moment, then forgotten. That's not apathy. That's surgical detachment. An insult is like bait. It's designed to pull you into predictable positions. You either defend yourself, proving their accusation mattered. You retaliate, proving they've gotten to you, or you play along, showing you'd rather be accepted than truthful. But there's another choice, one that's colder, one that burns quietly instead of exploding. You offer no movement. You sit in silence that isn't passive. It's calculated. Silence can be violent when delivered with intent. Stillness becomes a weapon. That's how Machiavelli operated. Not from rage, not from impulse, but from a high perch of emotional clarity. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the stakes. When someone mocked him, he didn't blink. He held their gaze, not with anger, with precision, not with ego, with presence, as if to say, I've already seen what this is, and I've already decided how it ends. And that look, that calm, unreadable quiet rattled the entire room. Because when someone refuses to break, you're forced to examine yourself. You see, people don't fear the man who shouts. They fear the one who doesn't flinch. That man has seen war and come back with eyes that know too much. He doesn't need to strike back because he's already seen the outcome. He knows where it goes, so he chooses not to walk that path. And that restraint, that poised stillness, that is far more terrifying than fury, because it suggests something deeper. It suggests discipline, experience, and control. Silence, when delivered intentionally, shifts the mood. People start asking questions. Why didn't he answer? Is he hiding something? Or is he beyond this? The insulter starts to shrink. The crowd's attention begins to tilt, and suddenly, the one who thought they had the upper hand is on the defensive. Not because they were confronted, but because they were ignored. That's the magic of refusing to engage. Machiavelli didn't just neutralize insult. He weaponized non-response. He didn't need to put people in their place. They did it themselves the moment they realized they couldn't touch him. Because nothing exposes insecurity like aggression that lands nowhere. Insults only stick when you're still wounded. If you've faced your insecurities, nothing sticks anymore. If someone calls you weak and you've reconciled with your strength, you don't blink. If they mock your history and you've made peace with your past, their words echo into nothing. The arrow returns to the archer. That's what makes a person uninsultable. Not pride, not perfection, but self-ownership. When you've already confronted your own darkness, no one else can use it against you. They try to shame you with what you've already transcended, and it collapses in their hands. That's the Machiavellian advantage, being untouchable not because you've never been wounded, but because you've already stitched yourself up. And sometimes the insult isn't just ignored, it's provoked on purpose. That's what separates the average strategist from a master. Machiavelli didn't just wait for attacks, he invited them, not recklessly, but deliberately. Because when someone insults you first, they're telling you something vital, they're revealing where they're fragile. So he'd create just enough friction in the room to make someone insecure step forward and reveal themselves. And once they did, he didn't retaliate. He studied them. He watched how they moved, how quickly they lashed out, how badly they needed validation. And from there, he mapped their pressure points. Because insults aren't just blows, they're disclosures. A person who insults first exposes their emotional balance. They show their thresholds, and in doing so, they become readable, predictable, defeatable. This is where most people fumble. They think strength is about hitting back. But the greatest move isn't force, it's patience. Let someone insult you in front of others, then say nothing. Let your stillness draw attention. Let the crowd lean in and feel the absence of reaction. That's when the shift happens. That's when people stop seeing you as a target and start seeing you as a constant. Because stillness in chaos isn't weakness, it's command. The attacker starts to feel it first. They realize their words didn't cause any tremor. They expected an explosion, but all they got was silence. And now that silence haunts them. Because if you're not reacting, it means you're either not affected, or worse, you're planning something far more deliberate. Machiavelli didn't care about disproving lies or clearing rumors. Why defend your name if that means placing it in someone else's hands? He knew that the strongest reputation is the one that doesn't ask for permission. He didn't explain himself. He made explanations unnecessary. He allowed silence to create mystery, and mystery always breeds fear. People respect what they can't define. When you don't explain, they wonder. When you don't respond, they speculate. When you don't flinch, they reassess. That's the reversal, not from force, but from restraint, not from attack, but from awareness. And it goes deeper. The insult itself holds more than intention. It holds information. When someone attacks your integrity, they're not revealing your flaws, they're revealing their envy. People don't swing at what they don't see as a threat. Mockery is often admiration in disguise, disguised as contempt, but built on comparison. If someone criticizes your calm, they're haunted by their own chaos. If they belittle your clarity, they're unsure of their own judgment. And if they call you arrogant, it's often because they've already measured themselves and found the gap unsettling. Machiavelli didn't ignore this, he used it. He listened, not for the insult itself, but for what it unveiled. Every jab was a roadmap, every sneer was a confession. He didn't hear pain, he heard leverage. While others were wounded by words, he was collecting blueprints. And in doing so, he remained untouchable, because he didn't let the insult hit him. He let it expose the attacker. Even when the insult stung, even when it caught him off guard, he didn't panic. He absorbed the blow without scrambling to fix the impression. That that awkward silence, that tension in the air, it belonged to him. Because instead of reacting, he took the weight of the moment and let others feel it. And in that space, power shifted. People began to see the difference. One man spoke with aggression, the other said nothing. But the one who said nothing left a deeper mark. That's what people remember. Not the insult, not the outburst, but the man who stood still while everything moved around him. That's how Machiavelli won, without noise, without rebuttal. He won because others exposed themselves and he made sure the right eyes noticed. So the next time someone throws a verbal stone in your direction, ask yourself, do you need to catch it? Or can you let it drop and echo back to them? Because there's a deeper truth few realize. Insults are gambles. They're not made to destroy you. They're made to test your foundation. And if you're unshakable, then the insult becomes the attacker's undoing. They tried to paint you with weakness, but all they ended up doing was showing the cracks in their own character. And what's colder than that? There are moments in life where words spoken aloud carry the weight of unseen battles. Insults, sharp and often cloaked in casual tones, come not merely to offend, but to disturb the foundation of your calm. And for most people, they succeed. The attack lands, the spirit shakes, they respond. But in that very moment, when the defense rushes out like a reflex, they hand over something critical, their frame, their image, their emotional direction. It is now being driven by the one who triggered them. That, in Machiavelli's view, is the beginning of psychological surrender. But Machiavelli was not like most men. He never allowed others to shape the tempo of his inner world. He wasn't disarmed by provocation, and he never flailed to protect his image. He saw something deeper in insult, an invitation, not to speak, but to see exactly who was losing control, to understand who felt threatened enough to make the first move. And that understanding was far more powerful than any response could ever be. Imagine this. You're in a conversation and a sudden jab cuts through. It's veiled in humor, perhaps dressed in sarcasm, but it's aimed to wound. The typical reaction? Retaliation, laughter, denial, or a flurry of self-justification. But not him. Machiavelli would let it linger in the air. He would allow the insult to echo unanswered. No words, no twitch, just presence. And in that vacuum, something fascinating would occur. The room would begin to turn, not against him, but toward the attacker. What just happened? Why the silence? Did he not hear it? Or did he hear too well? People notice these things, and Machiavelli knew that attention is never neutral. It flows towards stillness in the midst of noise, towards silence in a storm. He let his restraint do what most arguments could not. Shift perception. A well-delivered silence can be an earthquake, especially when it follows an insult that was supposed to be devastating. And if the insult did manage to land, if it struck something personal, exposed a raw spot, twisted a scar, still no panic, no correction, no stumbling words to rescue dignity. Instead, he would freeze the moment, absorb the full impact without fleeing from it. And by doing so, something colder than revenge began to happen. The weight of the insult stayed with the speaker. The discomfort grew around them, not you. Because the spotlight shifts fast. And when you don't flinch, the spotlight wonders, why not? That's how Machiavelli created his dominance, not through attack, but through stillness that demanded attention. He built his power not by proving people wrong, but by allowing them to prove themselves weak. That's the art most never master. Everyone wants to win. But only the Machiavellian understands that real victory lies in not needing to. Let's take this further. There are times when silence isn't enough, when the moment calls for a reply, but not just any reply. Not a rant, not a monologue, not a desperate swipe at your opponent's credibility. Machiavelli would respond with a single sharpened phrase, a statement so short, so pointed, it stopped the conversation cold. He didn't speak to argue, he spoke to conclude. Picture someone calling you a fraud. You don't argue, you don't list your accomplishments. You say, "You'd know," or they accuse you of arrogance, and you mistake comfort with certainty. Then silence. Nothing else. Because anything more begins to weaken the blade you just threw. Machiavelli preferred cuts to clashes, because clashes create chaos, cuts create memory. There's something unnerving about someone who doesn't rise to provocation. It breaks the rhythm people are used to. They're expecting drama. When none arrives, the emotional pendulum swings awkwardly. That discomfort is your power. Let it sit. Let them explain themselves. Let them unravel. Because here's what most don't grasp. When you don't defend, people begin to question the attacker instead. When you don't correct, they wonder if perhaps the insult wasn't even accurate. If it had been true, surely you would have flinched. But you didn't. That's psychological warfare at its most refined. Machiavelli treated insults not as obstacles but as tools. He dissected them. He used them to understand the minds of his enemies, because an insult tells you so much more than people think. It tells you what they watch in you. It reveals what they envy. It uncovers where they feel inferior. People don't hurl accusations out of nowhere. They strike what they fear. They jab where they wish they were stronger. So when they call you controlling, it often means they've never been able to set boundaries. When they call you emotionless, it may mean your composure reminds them of their chaos. When they mock your past, it reveals they're still haunted by theirs. Machiavelli understood these patterns instinctively. He didn't just hear the insult. He extracted the coordinates. He mapped out their psychology, and that made him formidable. Not because he was above insult, but because he used every one of them to build leverage. And when the time came to respond, he didn't react with noise. He responded with timing. Let's say the insult comes at the wrong moment, mid-discussion around an audience laced with humor. The crowd chuckles, waiting for a reaction. And Machiavelli would let the insult rest in the air like a dropped coin. Then he'd turn it into a trap. 3 methods, each surgical. First, a sincere question. Is that really how you see me? Suddenly the power shifts. The attacker has to stand behind their words. Most won't. They weren't expecting that. Now they retreat. They say they were joking. They backpedal. But they've already exposed themselves. The crowd sees it. The insult was never serious, and your composure made that obvious. Second, he'd repeat the insult, back in a flat tone. No sarcasm, no emotion, just exposure. So you believe I don't belong? You think I'm not capable? This method drains the insult of its momentum. It forces the room to examine it raw. And most insults, stripped of tone and timing, reveal themselves to be childish. The laughter dies, the mood shifts, and again, without attacking, you've reversed the current. Third, he would redirect the moment entirely. He'd speak as though the insult never happened. Anyway, back to what I was saying, and just like that, the attacker is frozen. They swung, and you stepped aside without acknowledging the punch. Now they're left off balance. The audience sees no hit, no response, no victory, just silence. And silence, when used well, can turn even the loudest insult into background noise. But the most elite technique, turning the insult into part of your own legend, Machiavelli believed in ownership, not of others, but of self. If someone called him ruthless, he'd call it efficiency. If they called him manipulative, he'd call it clarity. If they insulted his past, he'd say it made him who he is. He refused to let others define the narrative. Instead, he absorbed their criticism and rebranded it. That's not arrogance, that's strategic identity. And it works because once you own what was meant to shame you, it no longer has power. The very things meant to weaken you now reinforce your myth. They mock your scars and you show them the map you carved from them. Suddenly the insult fuels your gravity. And here's the final truth. The insult in its purest form is a compliment in disguise, not in its tone, but in its attention. People do not throw shade at those who do not stand in the light. The moment someone tries to tear you down publicly, they've made an admission. You matter. You are visible. You are significant enough to be a threat. That's why Machiavelli never asked, "Why me?" when attacked. He thought, "Of course, because only the powerful get mocked, only the present get tested, only the visible become targets." And instead of fearing that visibility, he welcomed it. Not because it fed his ego, but because it confirmed something deeper, that he had built something real, presence. And a presence is not built through defense. It is built through mastery of self, through silence that stretches without breaking, through gazes that study instead of reacting, through stillness that absorbs noise until it becomes irrelevant. And when you master that, people stop insulting you, not because they've grown kinder, but because they fear what might happen if you ever chose to respond. That's how power operates at its peak. Quiet, collected, untouchable.